Welcome. Thank you for coming today to the Waterloo Institute's for Health Informatics Research seminar. Very pleased to have a nice audience, and we have an ongoing series of seminars that are held monthly. Our next seminar is March the 8th. And the only other announcement that I have is that our next Waterloo Smarter Health seminar is on February the 22nd. And yours truly, Dominic Covey, will be giving this seminar. You might want to consider registering for this seminar. We do offer a draw for a BlackBerry, one of the latest BlackBerries, and so if you register and you attend, you have an opportunity of winning it. So you can register at hi.uwaterloo.ca. We welcome your attendance. Without any further ado, I'll introduce Maher Shanuda to introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Justin Wan, Assistant Professor in the School of Computer Science, University of Waterloo. Dr. Wan received several academic prizes and fellowships. In his research, Justin Wan develops advanced numerical techniques for solving partial differential equations arising from medical simulation, scientific visualization, image processing, and computational finance. Today, Dr. Wan will talk about understanding brain mechanics through computer simulation. Welcome, Justin.
So first, I'd like to thank the Waterloo Institute of Health Informatics Research for giving me the chance to speak here at the seminar series. My name is Justin Wayne. I'm from the David Cheriton School of Computer Science here. And today I'm going to talk about, I'll share with you my experience with computer simulations in the area of brain mechanics. And it's a joint work with two of my graduate students, Omer Hanabar and Jenny Lee. And so here in this talk, I'm going to go through some of the ideas about the simulations. In particular, we're going to look at this area of traumatic brain injury. And in particular, we're going to simulate two processes. One is closed head impact phenomena. The other one is hydrocephalus. And in this talk, we'll talk about the modeling issues in these simulations, which involves the solids, how to model solids, fluids, the geometry, the brain tissues, the biological matters, and then some other related issues like image processing and so on. And by the way, so this is really the hard work of my graduate students. So my role here is just to speak the work here. So now let's give you some idea about our head. So I don't know so much, well, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not going to talk about the details and all this, biology of the head, but just to point a few things that would be useful when we perform the simulation or to understand the issues involved in the simulation. So basically, we want to study the human brain, and human brain is a soft structure, and not as stiff as gel, and not as plastic as paste, but somewhat soft tissue. And since it's so soft, so it's protected by the skull. Now, when we say skull, actually, it has many different layers. So the outer part is the skin, okay, and then we have the different layers of different material structures, where the bone part, which we usually call the skull, okay, and then other softer layers to provide a cushion, okay, to protect the brain inside. And for the brain, there are different, also the brain is not a one uniform material, and generally speaking, it has the two areas, the gray matter and then the white matter. And then between the brain and the different layers of the skull, then we have a fluid in between, which is called the cerebrospinal fluid, usually called CSF. And so it's a liquid, something like water. And again, it serves as a cushion to protect the brain. And in this talk, we're going to spend quite a bit of time on this part of the brain. So there are many different situations where we will damage or hurt the brain. One is head injury, and there are several types. Here, I would like to focus on one type, the closed head injury. There's another type, the open head injury. Open head injury is when, say, object hit your head and so badly that the skull got fractured and so on, and it really looks terrible, all the blood and stuff. And in the past, people really thought that the open head injury is much more serious than closed head injury. And I think to normal people, when you look at a picture of an open head injury, it was, wow, so nasty. You would believe so. But in recent times, it turns out that the closed head injury is actually as bad as open head injury, if not worse. So that's the interesting thing. So how does it happen? So in closed head injury, there are two different situations. One is that the head moves to hit an object. So moving head, I call it. And you may wonder why I would, move my head and hit a wall. That sounds a little stupid. Of course, not that you want to do it. And it typically happens in an accident. For example, in a car accident, then you drive a car and then the car hits something. And since because of inertia, so your body will keep going forward, okay, and then your head will hit, say, the steering wheel. So that's one type of closed head injury. And the other one is that you actually stand here, then an object hit your head. For example, like here, you are in a robber or something, so someone holding a baseball bat and then strike your head, okay? And then in this case, your head sits still and then the object hits you. And it turns out that they are somewhat different, okay, in terms of the mechanics inside the brain. Now, notice what happened, okay? So when something hits your brain, then you hit your head, then your brain will move, okay? And then quite often the brain will hit the inner surface of the skull, okay? And then cause damage. And there are several types of damages, okay? So maybe the stretching of the or compression of the cells, the neurons, okay? And then or the stretching or the twisting, all will cause damage to the brain. So it becomes important to understand how this all works. Okay, just give you some idea how common this injury is. Okay, so this data comes from the Ontario Brain Injury Association. TBI basically it's a result of a blow to the head, and it could happen in the motorcycle crashes, and also falls. Okay, when you slip and fall. Okay, and when the head hit the ground. Assault or sports. Okay, sports also a very common cause of TBI. And in Canada, about 11,000 people die as a result of TBI, and 4,000 die in Ontario, or will die in Ontario. So it's a serious disease. Okay, and then it's also TBI is a leading cause of death for young children. And in order to take care of these patients, direct cause or indirect causes, it costs about $3 billion annually in Canada to take care of the patients, and about 6,000 Canadians annually become permanently disabled after TBI. So it's a very serious injury. Now here, I'll try to give you a picture how it works. So usually it's that at first there's an accident, could be a car crash, could be a fall, okay, and then something hit your head. And we call it external mechanical head load, so a force, a big force hitting your head. And there are different types, okay? So we have the contact type and the non-contact type. Okay, contact type is that you actually hit something. Non-contact type is that your head moves very fast, but it doesn't really hit anything. But since it moves so far, then the brain gets displaced, and then again, the brain gets hit on the inside of the skull, okay, and also cause that damage. For the impact types, then we have the penetrating impact, where say the bullet that hits your head, or the non-penetrating type like a bat. Okay, now the important thing is really the other part is the internal mechanical response, how the brain reacts to these external load, and usually it's in terms of stress. So you build up strain and stress inside the brain, and then if the stress and strain becomes so big, then it will cause damage. Or injury to the brain. So there's a separate mechanism, injury mechanism. And now in this talk, we're going to focus on the internal mechanical response, what's going to happen in the brain when there's an external force on the head. And it turns out that it's not, quite clear exactly what happens in the brain. Well, unfortunately, our brain is not transparent. We cannot really observe what's happening in the brain. And there are several theories to explain what has happened in the brain. Now, by the observation of the injury, there are two types of injury. One is called a coup injury. Coup injury means that the injury occurred at the location of the impact. And then there's another type called contra coup injury. That happens to the opposite end of the location. For example, if the forehead hits something, then the coup injury is here, and then the contra coup injury will be at the back of the head. So that has the picture to show you the coup and contra coup injury. And there are several theories to explain that, and they are somewhat different. Now, in the past, it was believed that the coup injury is more serious. And that seems reasonable, right? So someone hit your brain, the head, okay, so you got damage here, and then quite likely this damage is more serious than the image at the back. But surprisingly, in many situations, people observe that the injury at the back, the contra coup injury, is in fact more serious than the coup injury. So in other words, what it means is that when an accident occurs, it's not that the brain get damage here first. You actually get damage at the back first, although here the front is the location of the impact. So it sounds quite non-intuitive. So why is this? And there are several theories, okay? Positive pressure theory, negative pressure theory, and so on, okay? And I'm going to just mention two of the theories just to see why such phenomena occur. So the positive pressure theory says this. Initially, when the head suddenly accelerates, then the head moves, but not the brain. Brain inside sort of lag behind, okay? And so it will be in the sort of the end position. Okay, now when the head hit something, so it stopped, then the brain is already near to the end, to the back of the head. So when the head stops, then it will hit the back of the head. So that's the what this theory is about. So the brain lags behind, okay, during the sudden motion of the head. But there's one concern about this theory is that if the brain because the brain is not really just floating around inside our head, okay? It's not like a ping pong, okay, bumping around in the head. It actually is attached by blood vessels and other materials, okay? So it's more or less stable. So if the brain has to lag behind the brain, so this acceleration must be a big, large acceleration. Now, if that is the case, then now there's a belief that CSF fluid, okay, is denser than the brain. And if there's a sudden big acceleration, then it should be the fluid that lags behind, not the brain. So from that point of view, it becomes not quite right that it's, the brain, not the fluid lags behind. Now, the negative pressure theory, it's focused more on the part where the impact occurs. So now the head's moving and it hits something and stops. So when it's moving, so basically the head, the brain, everything's moved forward. Okay, now, but once it hits something, then the head stops, but then the brain inside, because of the inertia, keeps moving forward, and that's it will create a tension force at the back of the brain. So remember, there's some structure to hold the brain. So those structure try to hold the brain from going forward. So you create a large tension at those structures, and that causes the damage. And that comes from a tension force at the back of the brain. And again, if you believe that the CSF fluid is in fact denser than brain, then so when the head stops, then it shouldn't be the brain, but the fluid moves forward. Okay, in that case, the brain should displace backward. So again, if there's a concern whether really that's the case. So now we talked several times about the CSF theory. So now let's see what this theory is about. And by the way, the other theories, the positive pressure and the negative pressure, they don't really consider the fluid much. So the fluid is kind of out of picture. Now, this theory is, on the other hand, it's just focused on the fluid. Okay, now, we know the brain is really inside the fluid. So you have the fluid all around the brain as a protective layer. And the density of the fluid, it's about the same as the brain. But there's a belief that CSF is denser than the brain by about 4%. We wanted to verify this fact, by the way, but we couldn't really find any literature to say that the CSF is denser than the brain, or the brain is denser than CSF, we believe that they are about the same. But anyway, so according to this theory, CSF is denser, a little denser than the brain. Now, when it starts to move forward, then the brain and fluid will go with the same direction. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, now the head hit something, so it suddenly stopped. Okay, in this process, now the question is, which one will go forward, the fluid or the brain? And according to this theory, it says this, because CSF is denser, so it has a bigger inertia. So it should be the fluid that goes forward, and then the brain actually will display backwards. That's the theory of this CSF argument. Okay, so people actually have done experiments to justify this theory. So it works like this. There's a plastic jar that represents the head. Okay, and then inside the jar you put a balloon inside. The balloon represents the brain. Okay, and then you fill up the jar with salt water that represent the CSF fluid. And the salt water is, you control the density by mixing the amount of salt. So the density is about 1.04. So it'll be denser than the brain, than the balloon, which is filled with water, and the density is 1. So now you have this plastic jar inside with a balloon, and then filled up with all the salt water. Okay, now that represents our head. Okay, what people do is this. They move this bottle forward with constant speed, 1 meter per second, so to mimic the forward motion of the head. Okay, and then it hit something, so that mimic the impact. Okay, and then they use a camera to record what happened to the balloon that represents a brain. Okay, should it go forward and backward? Okay, so now here I took the pictures from the paper. It's not very clear, but you can get some idea how it works. So just push the bottle forward and see what happened. Okay, and then what happened is this. What I observed is, after about half a second, then the balloons try to move away from the impact. After 1 second, it actually is further away from the impact. So it's sort of demonstrate their theory that it's really the fluid goes forward and then displays the brain, and so the brain actually moves backward. But then after a while, because when the balloons kind of move to the other end of the bottle, okay, then it's sort of opposite effect that it will push back by the fluid. Okay, so we kind of go forward again. But the important thing is that initially it tries to go backward. So now people want to study this phenomena, and then one approach is to perform a computer simulation. The good thing about computer simulation is that we don't have the restriction of keeping the we don't have the issue of in vivo problem. Okay, so we can perform the simulation when we do experiments. Okay, then usually we do it for dead tissue, and dead tissue are different from living tissue, and also we can do a lot of different testing more easily in computer. Now, one important thing is the representation of the head and the brain and so on. And typically in the simulation, we use a finite element modeling of the head. Now, there are two things. Okay, one is geometry. The other one is the brain tissue, the biology. Now, I will talk about the biology a little more later. Okay, so basically, we need to have a mathematical model, appropriate models to model the structure. Okay, the tissue, this soft tissue in the brain. And we'll talk about this. Another thing is the geometry. Okay, represent the skull, the head, and also and the brain. And typically, it's different layers because of different layers of the skull. Okay, but usually grouped into 3 components. Okay, the cranium. Okay, it's just outside part. So the skull part, okay, the protective layer. Okay, and then the meningeal layers, and basically that include the sort of soft cushioning inside. Okay, CSF usually is also within that layer. Although people don't model CSF as fluid. Okay, they model it differently. I'll talk about this. Okay, and then the brain, the third part of the model. Okay, and then people perform calculations using this finite element, and then try to see what happened inside the brain. Now, by the way, so different structures with different elements and so on, and also we use different models because they're different materials. Okay, we use different models to model these layers. Okay, and then at the end we got all this geometry equation set up. They would solve this equation, and typically what people do is to use some finite element software, and that's actually a little side effect if you do this. Okay, now you solve the equations. Then one thing that people are interested in is the strain and the stress inside the brain. And if the strain and stress will go over a certain level, then we expect damage will occur at that location. So here shows you, one example, the distribution of the strain and the stress in the brain. Now, everything looks so fine, but then here one important thing is missing is the CSF. Okay, as I said, they are modeled as different layers, and they usually use software, commercial software, finite element software to do it. Now, finite elements are typically used for structured, to model structures like buildings and bridges and so on. They are solids, okay? So their code usually mostly handle solid materials. So CSF is not solid, it's liquid, really, it's fluid. What they do is that they treat the CSF as some kind of special solid so that they can use the commercial finite element code to solve the equation. But no matter how special solid it is, solid is solid, it's different from fluid. So it doesn't really take into account the effect of CSF. But we just see that, okay, so the CSF, in the CSF theory, we see that it could be a critical factor that determines what happened inside the brain, inside the head, okay, the mechanics could be very different if you take that into account. So in our simulation, that's what we want to do. We want to treat both the solid boundary and also the elastic brain in the inside. So in the model, we have two parts. One is the CSF part, the fluid part. For the fluid part, we use the Navier-Stokes equation to model it, which CSF basically is like water. Okay, so it seems to be a valid modeling for this fluid. And in this Navier-Stokes equations, basically two set of equations. The first set is the momentum equation, conservation of momentum. The second set of equation is conservation of a mass. For fluid, okay, we allow it to move around with different shapes, but it may change shape, but it shouldn't change the mass. So with these two set of equations, and U, by the way, represent the fluid velocity, rho is density of the fluid, P is the pressure, okay, and then the viscosity and some other stuff. Okay, so we solve this equation to see the motion of the fluid. Okay, and then the other modeling of is the modeling of the brain tissue, and we use the viscoelastic modeling. I'll talk about that later. So we treat it as somewhat like a solid. And then also the geometric modeling. Now, right now we are more focused on the effect of CSF on the impact phenomena. So we just use a very simple geometry, a square head, okay, and then circular brain. That's what we do here. And then in between, we have the CSF fluid. And then we want to simulate the process of this moving head. So we assume that the head is moving with a velocity v to the right. And now we want to simulate this process. Now we have all the geometry, all the equations, but now one thing is missing. As the boundary condition, we want to make sure that we are simulating this particular phenomena. Okay. Now, when we do the simulation, it turns out it will be easier to compute the velocity of CSF and the brain with respect to the outside boundary, or in other words, with respect to the head, not from respect to the outside observer. Okay, so because of that, so we assume that the boundary on the outside is actually 0. Okay, because it's relative to the outside boundary. Okay, and then the velocity for the initial velocity of the fluid and the brain would be going this way because of the relative velocity. Okay, but for the outside observer, the initial velocity of the brain should be 0. The initial velocity of the skull should be v. Okay, but now we sort of do it the opposite way. We're computing the relative velocity. Anyway, so we perform some experiments. Okay, one is that the brain, the density of the brain is 100, which is the same as water. Okay, and then the fluid density, the CSF, it's a little less. It's about 4% or something like this, 3% less. And then the head, the box, is moving to the right with a speed of 1 meter per second for about 0.2 seconds. At 0.2 seconds, it hits something, so it stops. Okay, and then but then we still let the fluid and the head moves. And by the way, I should also mention this. This is a very preliminary result. Okay, we're not quite done with the simulation yet, but just some intermediate result that I think will be interesting to see. Now, here's the graph of the velocity of the brain. So originally the brain is 0, it doesn't really move, but then when the head starts to move, then we see that the brain starts to move a little bit negative, so start moving backward a little bit, okay? And then it catch up, moves, goes up a little bit more, but still not very big, okay? And then during the impact time, so 0.2 seconds, maybe I should use the laser pointer. So during the impact time, then the brain will suddenly move much faster to the right. So that's what is calculated. Now let's look at the picture here. So that's the brain, and then we have the fluid moving, okay, this way because the relative velocity of the fluid is going this way, okay, and then so this is right afterwards. So the brain starts to move left a little bit, okay, but then afterwards, then you kind of catch up and move right again with the head and brain, okay, and this is right before impact, okay. So basically, you have the fluid kind of pushing the brain this way, but then you also have the fluid go around the brain and then reach the back of the head, okay, and then we create a pressure to push it this way. So you have this two sort of pressure. One goes this way, one going the other way, and the brain more or less actually stay in this position, okay. Okay, now this is the right after impact. Right after impact, this part kind of disappears, okay. So because that's, the front part is not moving anymore, it stopped, okay. But then this inside pressure from the back is also there, so it kind of push the brain forward, okay. So that's the idea. And then here, the blue arrows, unfortunately, is not very clear, shows the velocity profile of the CSF. And let me show you an animation how it looks like. Oops. Sorry about that. I forgot to copy my animation. Oops. So now let me show you the animation. It shows you the profile of the fluid and also the motion of the brain. It's hard to see because actually it doesn't really move that much. Okay, it's more or less stay in this region. Okay, but then the fluid is kind of going around the brain like this, and now that's the part where you have the impact. Then suddenly, then the brain will go a lot faster forward, and then it actually stop when it hit the front part of the skull. This is another experiment, which is similar, but then now the initial speed is 5 meters per second, which is much faster, and then the time it's shorter because it's faster. But a similar observation. Okay, so the brain more or less stay where it is, and then during the impact, then it suddenly catch up the speed and then just move forward. Okay, and here's the profile of the fluid. And by the way, when the fluid it moves so fast, then you actually may see some turbulence, okay, in your head. Okay, it sounds crazy, but yeah, it could happen. With all this fluid flow, fast fluid flow, okay, inside, then you may get a little bit of turbulence. But of course, this is not quite right because the head is actually circular shape. The circular shape will help to minimize that effect. Yeah.
How do you ramp up the speed? You move forward for 0.1 second.
Yeah. So you're asking about how I move the head?
You're obviously not suddenly starting at zero, because that would be the same as the impact. So how are you getting it going at that speed?
So how do I start the initial? So the question was about how I start the initial velocity of the head. Okay. So basically, that's the initial condition. So in my simulation, the initial condition is 5 meters per second or 1 meter per second for the fluid on this side. So initially, the fluid suddenly has this velocity initially.
So everything starts moving, but that's still not even quite steady state because the brain is, after that, moves around a bit.
Right. So the question was about, okay, so everything start moving afterwards. That's true, yes. So initially, the brain and the fluid really stationary. Okay? They don't move. Okay, but because of the sudden motion of the brain, so it causes a sudden large velocity on one part of the fluid, okay? And that will create motion for the other part of the fluid and also cause a motion to the brain as well. So we're simulating the process, what's going to happen, and it's not to the steady state yet, okay? And in fact, this is a very short time period. We're talking about 0.1 second, 0.2 second, a very short time, no steady state yet, Okay. In fact, before the steady state happens, then you have the impact. Okay. Once you have the impact, then the boundary condition will be different. Okay. And then you have a very different phenomenon. Okay. So it's not steady state at all in this simulation. Okay. So again, that's the another simulation. It's somewhat similar to before. It's just that the magnitude is bigger. But quantitative splitting is about the same. So initially move a little bit backward, but then, then restore to the original position more or less, maybe a little bit forward, but not much. But then really during the impact, then you can see a big sudden change in velocity. It suddenly moves, that's the instance. It suddenly moves, you can see it moves to the right and then hits the skull. Okay, and in the meantime, you can also see a little bit of turbulence. As I said, okay, we don't really have that much turbulence in our spherical head. Anyway, so another simulation is that where now we use a bigger density. We don't see whether the density of the brain will play a role in the simulation. Okay, remember in the CFF theory, okay, the whole theory is based on the argument that the fluid is denser to the brain. So we want to verify that part. So now we use something a lot denser, but it turns out that qualitatively speaking, it's the same similar situation as before. The only difference is that the motion of the brain is slower because it's heavier, so it doesn't move as fast, as quick as the other ones. Question?
You've got the brain more dense than the fluid, whereas you're testing the opposite.
Right. So yeah, that's right. So that's my fourth test here.
Okay,
it's
sorry.
the other way around. So, but just to show you, again, the simulation result. Okay, that's what happened. And again, it shows a very, very similar phenomenon. So according to our simulation, what we found is this: the density doesn't seem to play as important role as and that particular theory suggests. But again, it's a very preliminary result. Okay, so we still have working on this and see whether we can do a much more careful, more accurate job. But anyway, so now here's the another situation where the density is a lot less than the fluid. Okay, and then 1 meter per second to right, and then 0.2 second of the impact. And we can see this more or less the same phenomena. Okay, nothing much happened. Okay, but then during the impact, then it will suddenly go forward. The same thing if we make this close. So this is actually close to the experiment. The brain is a little less than the fluid. Okay, but again, the qualitative result is very similar than before. Okay, so some conclusion about this simulation compared with the theories. What we found is that initially the brain actually lags behind for a short period of time, so it kind of confirmed the positive pressure theory that things lag behind, but not for long. Okay, after a while, then actually it will sort of goes back to the original position. That's somewhat consistent with the CFF density theory. Okay, but then at the impact, the brain actually continues to move forward, and that's sort of consistent with the negative pressure theory. So, so far this simulation seems to suggest that all this theory could be possibly all correct. I think everybody's happy. But still, okay, we have to really check everything, make sure that we do everything really correctly. And one thing that we are not quite certain at this point is whether we set the boundary conditions exactly the way it is during an impact. Okay, so that's the simulation result that we have for the impact simulation. The other one is a very sort of different type of simulation where the process is a lot slower. So impact simulation usually within a second, but here now it's slower, but still have something to do with the CSF. Okay, so CSF, it's as I said, it's a fluid, it's a cushion, and basically it's that it's not stable. It's not just some dead water inside the brain. Actually, the brain keeps producing fluid inside. It's about 20 millimeters per hour. Okay, and then the fluid will flow to the other parts, okay, to the spinal and so on, okay, and then goes back to the cranium, okay, absorbed there. So usually there's approximately constant amount of fluid inside the brain, okay, inside the ventricles, around the brain, and so on to protect the brain, but it's that's really moving, okay. So that's sort of so that's a picture how it looks like. So the projection mostly about 60% is somewhere here, and then the fluid moves around, okay, in different other regions, okay, the spinal cord and so on, okay, and then eventually move back to this region and then reabsorb to the tissue again, okay. So at the end, you have a balance of production and absorption. Hydrocephalus is a medical condition that this balance is lost, okay, and in particular, the absorption part it's not functioning well. So we have the production but not the absorption. So then the fluid sort of accumulating in the brain, and this could be caused by the blockage of the drainage pathway. So there may be several theories to explain that part, but I don't want to go into that. But what I want to say is what happened next. Okay, is that because of the accumulation of fluid, so it makes the ventricle to expand. Okay, and that will cause the compression of the brain against the inside of the skull. Okay, and that's not good. Now for babies, because the skull is not, the bone is actually not well, it's still very soft. Okay, so when the ventricle expand, okay, we also expand the skull. So you can see this, super big head babies. They look somewhat like, well, not a pleasant look. It looks awful, but actually it turns out to be a good thing because it releases some of the compression inside the brain. So it actually will cause less damage, but still not good phenomenon. And now, the hydrocephalus, this process can be occurred in different reasons. Okay, so quite often for babies is at birth. And also can be a result of a brain tumor or head trauma. So when someone hits your brain, okay, and then now you have this, your brain, moving around and hit the skull and got damage and so on. But then there's sort of secondary effects, and during the secondary stage, hydrocephalus can occur, and then you have the expansion of the ventricle and so on. Now, unfortunately, we cannot cure hydrocephalus, so we don't know how to do it. We only treat hydrocephalus phenomenon. And what do we do? Or what the physicians do is that, well, you have too much water in your brain, right? Okay, so now let's drill a hole in your head and then release the fluid out. So basically, that's what happened. So it doesn't sound too not as bad as what I said. Basically, they insert a shunt into the ventricle, okay, and then release the fluid out. And there are two typical procedures. One is to leave the fluid to the let's say into the stomach or something, to the abdominal part of the body, or to the heart. Okay, so anyway, it's to release the fluid out of the ventricle, so to release the pressure and so on. This phenomenon turns out to be quite common in the United States. About 1 in 1,000 births, you get hydrocephalus. In WHO has estimated about 1 in every 2,000 babies in the world that got hydrocephalus. And then for those patients, you have to perform the shunt operation. And in the States, about 25,000 shunt operations performed each year. And about 85% of these patients, they have to do it at least 2 times, okay? And I'll talk about that, why they have to do it several times. Well, actually right here, okay? So the reason is that, okay, it may be failed, the shunt, okay? And it's failed, one big reason actually because of the infection. The other one is it's got blocked. So when the ventricle goes back to the healthy state, okay, then the brain tissue will swell and deflate and so on, okay? And then the brain tissue will cover will block the shunt, okay, and then the shunt doesn't work anymore, and then you need another surgery. So, people spend, the U.S. government spent a lot of money, it's $100 million, okay, to perform the shunt surgery. So it's a big cost to the society. So one thing would be good to know is that if you know how the ventricle shrink, or how the brain tissues restored to the better shape, then they will help to locate the initial position of the shunt. So that's the motivation for the simulation here. Now here shows you the picture of the pre-shunt surgery. You can see this huge, big ventricle. This is after the shunt surgery. The ventricle is much smaller. The normal size of ventricle is about this big. It's not very, very big. Okay, and fortunately, the failure rate is about 50%. So it would be nice to have a good prediction of the the ventricle. Now, one way to do it is to use medical imaging. And that sounds reasonable because when you diagnose a patient, you actually got a medical image. Okay, you do either MRI or CT scan, okay? You get an image of the brain and the ventricle. So you got the images, why not to use it, right? So this imaging approach is this. You do some segmentation to get the boundary of the ventricle, okay? And then you get this curve. Okay, now what I do is this, I evolve the curve. I let it move inward. Okay, now in that case, I need something to help me, okay? Some numerical methods and also some equation to help me to evolve curve. And you can move it with a speed f, function f. And in this case, actually, constant speed -1. So -1 go forward, +1 will go outside. So I want it to go inside. So now you apply the speed and let it move, okay? And see all this different position of the curve that moved inside, okay? And then that simulates the shrinking process when you perform the shunt surgery, okay? So now this one here inside, okay, this curve will become the prediction of the ventricle after the surgery. Now, one good thing about this numerical approach is that it allows topological change. Now, typically, the big, large ventricle is one closed curve. But then after shrinking, if you look at the same slides here, then the ventricle will appear as different, separate closed curves. And it's actually not so, that's an issue. How do you handle this topological change in the numerical simulation? So this method, the good thing is that it can handle it pretty well. Yeah?
I guess this needs to be pushed. Okay. You're talking about curves, but of course these are surfaces, right? These are cavities.
Yes.
And what are we looking at here?
Actually, I'm only working on curves. I take only one single image. So here, I really get a curve, not a surface.
What if you throw a slice this way through the head? Do you like a topological map?
Sure, but okay. I thought this was a diagnostic thing that you did on people who are alive, but I guess not.
Yeah,
This is alive.
but it's a CT slice. You're using the computer tomographic machine to do the equivalent of cutting through the skull in an image.
So usually you have many slides, okay? So this only, so you have the different slides of the brain, and I here only take one slide, okay? You could take all the slides and form a 3D model of the brain, okay? And then the boundary won't be a curve, it will be a surface, okay? And you can apply the same thing, okay? You can apply the same technique and to evolve surface, okay? And then do this prediction. We can do this, but right now we only work on the simple case, the 2D case. Okay, so now that's the, you shrunk the curve, and that's the prediction. It turns to be not so bad compared to the actual post-shunt image. Now, but there's some tricky thing. One thing is that how far you should go. Well, people don't know. And I kind of chill a little bit here, okay? So I stop at the moment where it matches the post-shunt image quite well. But in general, if you want to use it as a prediction, then you need some mechanism to stop it. And that's not so clear how, what is, the mechanism to stop it. Another problem with the image approach is that it doesn't use any of the biomechanical properties of the brain. So it just treats as an image, okay, and then try to do something. So for example, it doesn't take into account the elasticity of the brain tissues, the pressure of the liquid, and so on. Okay, so now what we want to do is that we want to perform a simulation of the brain, and we take into account for all these parameters, as well as the pressure and so on, and see how the brain deforms during hydrocephalus. Okay, so here's our model. So we have a model for the brain tissue. We call this constitutive models. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then what this constitutive model is used is to describe quantitatively describe the material. Okay, so different materials will behave differently, and then we get different kind of equations. And typically, that relates the stress and strain relation. I'll talk about that in a minute. And because of that, so we have different types of process with different type of modeling. For example, in a slow process like hydrocephalus, then we would consider the quasi-static state, so things doesn't really move much. And in this case, then people use viscoelastic or elastic models to model the brain tissue. Now, for the impact, where things go very fast, and typically people don't use the linear model. People would use the nonlinear viscoelastic model. Now, just to give you some idea, okay, what I'm talking about, okay, if you're not familiar with the model now, basically that's what people do to model the brain with different materials. And some people say it's rubber, some people say no, it's silly putty, some people say no, it's sponge. And it really depends on the stress and strain. Okay, strain is the deformation, the amount of deformation. Stress is the corresponding force. Okay, elastic means like spring. Okay, so the more you compress it, then more force you need. And viscoelastic mode says basically the same thing. The more you compress it, you get more force. But this deformation, not just the current deformation, but also what happened before. So it has a history. So if you have ever played the silly putties, when you try to elongate and try to split it, actually it doesn't really split. Okay, just keep going longer and longer because it somehow remembers the history of the deformation. And poroelastic model is that, okay, it's like sponge, okay, but with a lot of holes that water can pass through and so on. So that's three common models people use for the brain, and they're used at different situations. Now, there are other issues that I don't really want to talk too much, but something that you might want to worry about in the simulation is whether we should use a compressible or incompressible model. Now, there's a parameter called the Poisson ratio to describe whether something is incompressible. It's 0.5, then it's incompressible. It's like rock. Now, for the brain, it turns out that it's not quite incompressible. The number is about close to 5, but not quite. So it's somewhat compressible, the brain. Now, another more controversial is whether it should be fluid or solid. Now, the brain that we also usually see, in laboratory or on TV, those are dead brain. Okay, dead brains are really solid, but dead brains are very different from living brain. Living brains is more fluid, like more soft and more watery. And because of that, so it exhibits really both the fluid behaviors and solid behaviors. So some people use this viscoelastic model, which has both the elastic and viscous or fluid properties. And then you also have to worry about how to generate the mesh, okay, in order to do the calculations. And some other thing is that registrations, especially for hydrocephalus, you have the pre-shunt image and the post-shunt image, and you really want to compare the two, then you have to align those two images for comparison, and it's not something too easy. But today I don't want to spend too much time to talk about that part, but really focus on the simulation part. So for the brain modeling, we mentioned about different models. The elastic models like spring, okay, and the stress basically is proportional to strain, and people usually use a symbol like this. And then the other possibility is the linear dashport. It's something like the fluid, that the stress is proportional to the strain rate, not the strain. So the equation looks like this, and we use a symbol like this to denote it. So you can imagine this is something like solid, this is something like fluid. Okay, and then viscoelastic fluid is sort of a combination of the two things. And there are many different ways to combine them. You can combine them in a series like this. This is called the Maxwell model. That's the corresponding equation between the stress and the strain. You could combine it a little complicated way. So you do it in parallel, do it in series, and then combine the two. And then you get a somewhat more complicated model for the elastic model of the brain. And all these models have been used on the brain simulations in the literature. So in our experiment, I believe we used the Burgers modeling. Okay, so now here's the formulation of a simulation. So first of all, we simulate the slow process of hydrocephalus. So we use the quasi-static approximation, which means things are not changing very fast. In particular, the force term, okay, if you are familiar with Newton's mechanics, so the ma term is gone, it's assumed to be 0. And then the deformation is not very big, and there's no external force. So the corresponding equation of motion is just these same equations, where on the right side we have the change of the stress, and according to the quasi-static assumption, it should be 0. Another equation that relates the displacement and the strain of the brain, so how much deformation of the spring of the brain. And then we have our constitutive equations. We use the Burgers model, somewhat more complicated, but somewhat closer to the brain property. Okay, and then if you care about the math, the equation looks something like this. The relaxation function for the corresponding the stress and strain looks something like this. It's rather complicated. If integral terms, you have the derivative terms, and so on. So in general, it's difficult to come up with an analytic solution of this equation. So what we do is to perform a numerical simulation, numerical solution to these equations. And then finally, we need a boundary condition so that we have a well-posed problem. So we assume that the boundary of the head is 0. So we're not simulating the baby hydrocephalus. And also, on the ventricle, so between the water and the brain, we assume that the surface force on the brain is equal to the pressure force of the fluid. And the force actually is a normal force, and we assume the tangential force is 0. Okay, so that's the starting point. We take a medical image, okay, and then we do a segmentation to get the outside boundary, the head, which assume doesn't move, okay, and then the inside boundary, which is the ventricle, which would move, okay, and then we take these two curves and then use a level set function, a function to represent these two curves. The good thing is this, I could use these two functions to create a mesh, okay, in between. Okay, it's not so obvious, really, okay, how to create a mesh, okay. But with the level set function, there's algorithm to do it. So that's how it looks like with all these triangles, and then we perform finite element simulation. We solve the governing equations with the boundary conditions that we impose, and that's how it looks like. Okay, so originally, let me see. So originally, that's the hydrocephalus patient image. So in this image, then the ventricle has already been expanded. So the pressure inside is high, so it creates a force outside to expand the ventricle. Now we want to do the sort of the other way. We take this picture, okay, and then put a negative pressure inside. So now the pressure is lower, and then it should shrink and contract. And that's how it looks like. And you can see that it's not quite the same as what we saw in the pre-shunt image. And the reason is this. In this image, this expanded image, actually there's already a compression. Okay, there's deformation occur already, and we don't know it, unfortunately. Given this pre-shunt image, there's no way we can tell how much brain is deformed. So we don't know about the deformation, where they deform more and where they deform less. So what we do is simply just take it as it is, as a steady state without any deformation, and then we apply negative force in the middle. Hopefully that would create the that would be the same as to perform the shunt surgery, but unfortunately it's not quite the same thing. So in order to explain that what we're doing is wrong, so we have this experiment. So this is a simple experiment where the initial shape is a square, and then we increase the pressure inside to expand it. We got a shape like this, okay, and then we take this as it is without the information of the compression and the deformation and so on. Just take it as it is and then shrink it. Then that's the shape we got. Now for this, this deformation is not very large. Then this one, it's somewhat close to the original one, but still not quite, because we don't know about the deformation. Now here we do the same thing, but then the deformation is much more than before. And again, we don't know how these materials are deformed inside. We just take this image as it is, apply negative force, and you see that because it's a circular shape, when you shrink it, it remains as a circular shape. And so in order to make this work, we need to know the deformation or the compression of the brain for a hydrocephalus patient. But that turns out to be difficult, and it's unclear how we can do this. So finally, I just want to conclude about our experience in these medical simulations. It provides a different means to study the brain. And compared to the imaging approach, we incorporate mechanical properties. So hopefully our simulation is more accurate description of the real thing. Compared to the experimental approach, the good thing is that we can make changes much easier, and we can do in vitro simulations and so on if we know the parameters. What is difficult is that we don't know the parameters. We don't know the actual density of the fluid and of the brain. We don't know the elasticity constants for the brain, and we don't know the stress strain information of the hydrocephalus brain. So some difficulties when we try to perform accurate simulations. But anyway, so here so far we have done some preliminary work. So what we would like to do in the future is to do a full 3D modeling and simulation of the brain. So thanks for your attention.
we have time for some questions or comments, and I got a light here. Questions, comments.
Do you have any idea what's being, like, first of all, is there a membrane between the parenchyma and the CSF?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
And in our case, we focus more on the effect of CSF. So all those membranes, and actually there are different layers of membranes attached to the skull, okay? And we just treat it as one layer outside.
And do you know when the brain is compressed, like in what you showed us, it's compressed by quite a lot, the volume goes way down. What is being displaced from that? Blood, water, fat, I don't know.
You mean this one here?
I mean, in a real situation, when someone, maybe their brain's working fine, and suddenly they get hydrocephalus and their parenchyma volume goes down, what is being removed for the volume to go down? Do you have a feel for that?
The volume of the
Parenchyma.
or the brain.
Parenchyma, the brain parenchyma.
It's really so the brain got compressed. That's really what happened. So the ventricle get larger, okay, and then the brain got compressed. So it's actually smaller.
So it goes down in volume. So what? I don't think it's really that. Like the brain itself is not really compressible that much. So what's being removed? Do you have an idea?
Not really. I really don't know exactly how much. So what's exactly? So maybe my students have any ideas?
Some people treat the brain as a sponge, right? So if it is compressed, it is the water or the fluid that is removed if you assume the brain is a porous elastic material. But in our simulation, we did not consider that. We just consider the brain as a uniform viscoelastic material, so we did not consider removal of anything at all. So.
Other comments or questions?
I don't want to take everyone's time, but I do have a comment. You said missing data and measurements are a big problem, and there is a technology in MRI called elastography, where they actually, I've seen talks where they do it on a dead pig's brain, so I don't know if they can do it on live people brains, but they essentially put the person's head in a jig and they shake it very gently, and by putting the MR acquisition in phase with the shaking, you can actually observe small movements in the brain. So maybe, I think they actually talk about acquiring tensors for each voxel.
Right. So people have performed simulation, and many of the experiments are for dead tissue because it's easier to do. But unfortunately, dead tissues are not the same as living tissues. That's also well known. So the question is, what exactly is the living tissue parameters? And in that case, you really need to perform experiments on a live tissue, but that becomes difficult. How can you perform experiments on a living body? So that's why.
But I think it'd be worth considering if you can put someone with hydrocephalus in there, and maybe the over-compressed parts of the brain have different elastic properties than the other parts of the brain, then you can get at that information that you're looking for. This is just, I don't know if that's true or not, but that might be a direction to go. And the vibrations I'm talking about, I think are small. I don't think it's that you can't do it to a live person. I think it's just developing, and it's not yet made its way through the medical practices yet.
Yeah. Okay. So some other more traditional way of experiment is to do a load experiment, and I think vibration people are doing this in recent years to get the parameters, and for some of the parameters for the models, the Burgers models, and so on. And people use it and to compare the data, the measurements. Okay, afterwards. They are not so bad, even for, they got it from dead tissue or from tissue not from human brain, but maybe from animal brains, and they turn to be reasonably good. So we could, we're going to actually use some of these available data to do the experiment, but right now we haven't really at that point yet. And also, we only take it as one material here, not as different layers of materials that some other people have done. And again, I think it's different focus here. we want to focus on one issue of the simulation. So for here we are interested in the expansion or the shrinking of the ventricle, and for the other one, the contact one, we are more interested in the interaction of the how the fluid affects the overall impact of the head. So some part we just simplify it to be one layer.
Any comments from the other students? At one point, it seems to me that the motion of the brain, and particularly in the injury thing that you're looking at, would be dependent upon the distance between the brain and the skull and the fluid channel, if you want. It would seem if that were very close, you would have effectively equivalent of a hydraulic brake kind of thing. Have you looked at the variation in the distance there, or is that based on physiological measurements, or what?
Yeah, it's a very good point. So, but so far our experiments are very similar. We have a square head and circular brain. So we have tried different size of the brain, and we got somewhat similar qualitative results. Okay, but in real brain, okay, the cephaloid is actually not that thick. Okay, it's actually very thin. I think it's about 0.2 upon 3, okay, centimeters or something like that, right? So it's actually very thin. So a small displacement of the brain would have, hit the interior part of the skull already. So it's something that we are going to look into.
No, I'm not thinking so much of the distance for the injury as the distance around the brain that the fluid has to move through as it moves away from the edge. So it would be going through a thinner channel, which would act as a hydraulic brake.
Yeah. So no, we haven't really. At that situation, again, the geometry they're using so simple. It doesn't really create that.
It'd be interesting just to take your geometry and narrow the channel to a third, because I think it's really quite distant now. The distance, the size of the brain compared to the size of the skull is relatively small compared to the physiological case.
Right.
So if you simply made the channel so that it was more physiological, you might see the effect of a significant delay effect there.
Right.
And going back to Jeff's thing, I think that even if, I agree with you, dead tissue is different from live tissue, but at autopsy, the brain is largely the same physiologically, if you look at it and handle it and so on, as it is during surgery. All right. You could at least get some basic measurements, I would think, at least some ideas of through that kind of vibrational study from brains at autopsy, or even animal brains, and then impose it on this. It might give you a better situation. I guess the final point is the degree to which these subcomponents of the brain make a difference. The fact that you've got fluid, you've got neuronal tissue, you've got blood vessels, and so on. The blood vessels themselves, particularly the arteries, must act as something like a tethering system.
Yeah,
and because they tear. We know that in major injury.
Yeah.
And that would be, at least, introducing some of that would seem to get more towards the direction. I just want to ask you one question is what do you think is the value of this? What do you think, how do you think this will change things? Forget the hydrocephalus, just on the injury side. Does this have potential impact in the interpretation of brain injuries, or where do you see the value?
The important thing is this. Really, what happened during an impact inside the head? Okay, so whether the brain really goes forward and backward and so on. If we do know it, okay, so if you know that the most critical part is, let's say, is the initial acceleration of the head, or maybe the most important thing is during the impact, then we can design, for example, for car crash, okay, we can design a safety feature in the car to minimize that effect. So airbag could be one way to do it, okay, but airbag more about the impact. Okay, the time of impact. But if what is important, let's say, is the initial acceleration of the brain, then maybe we should have something different features or safety features there as well. So it becomes a very important information for in car crash would be the safety features, how we and also we can also see simulate whether those airbag will really help to protect the brain damage. And right now, since we don't really certain what happened inside the head, what this injury occurs and how it happens. Okay, so it becomes just a belief that all these features, the airbags and so on, okay, are doing the job. But I think more understanding would improve all of this.
Are you doing any work at all with people in engineering who are working on crashes and devices and so on?
Not really. We have
It's another possibility is interacting with some of those, because the issue of constraint systems is one of their concerns,
Right.
and might be interesting here. Well, I expect to see in future GM ads, instead of just a dummy, I expect to see Justin's work here as one of the proofs that their cars are better than somebody else's car. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.